Hello, Liam O'Mara here, sitting in the car with campaign manager Bridget,
Hello.
and sitting in traffic, and Bridget decided to throw some questions at me, so let's see where this goes.
All right. First question, who are the Kurds?
Who are the Kurds? All right, well, Kurds are an Indo-Iranian ethnic and linguistic group. They're part of the Indo-European peoples, which means they're then related to the populations, well, most of the populations of Europe, of Iran, of South Asia. Their ancestors had migrated into the regions that they live in now, somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 years ago. So they've lived in the region for quite a long time, living up in the mountains of northern Mesopotamia. Today, their population straddles 4 different countries because no country was really created ever for Kurds, but they've lived in the area consistently for a long time. In fact, famous crusader Salahuddin, or Saladin, is a Kurd. So they've been there for quite a long time.
Well, you've mentioned they've never had a country for themselves. Does that mean that they're not a nation?
See, country and nation mean different things. Country, state, and nation all have distinct definitions. A nation is a group of people with something in common. So, a common history, a shared culture, shared language. There's a variety of different features that can make up what a nation is, because its definition is always very subjective. But nations are groups of people with something in common. A country is a state that has sovereign territory, states being like basic institutions, borders, governance, military, that kind of thing. And if your state has control over territory, yeah, you're a country. The Kurds have never been a country, but Kurds are a nation, and Kurdistan is a place.
Okay, so what's happening in Syrian Kurdistan?
All right, so the Syrian part of Kurdistan historically is the smallest of the 4, because, again, the Kurdish population is spread between Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And Syrian Kurdistan has historically been kind of like, left to do its own thing under the Assad's Arab regime, but have carved out a little bit of autonomy during the course of the civil war since 2012. That makes the Turks nervous because their own much larger Kurdish population had fought an insurgency for a few decades against repressive Turkish ethno-national policies trying to gain independence and or autonomy in the region. And the Turks, in sort of racist sort of way, say all Kurds are basically the same thing. So having Syrian Kurds have a bit of autonomy on their border makes them nervous, in the same way that Iraqi Kurds having autonomy in their region makes them nervous, because they think, oh, well, that means all the Kurds are going to unite and create a country and blah, 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 and Turkey will lose land. So it has invaded northern Syria in order to push Kurds away from its border in a 440 kilometer wide swath of territory, about 32 kilometers deep into the country. So it's a big chunk of territory they want to push Kurds away from, and then they want to resettle in that territory a couple million Sunni Arabs from Syria that are living as refugees in Turkey.
Well, they're resettling refugees. Why is this a bad thing?
Well, they would be resettling refugees on land that they're stealing from somebody else. So the argument is basically for what we tend in common parlance to call ethnic cleansing. It moves a population from one chunk of territory and puts somebody else in its place. So it's bad in the same way that, say, if we think back to the 1990s and the Yugoslav wars, why did the U.S. get involved there and end up bombing Serbia? Because Bosnian Serbs were committing war crimes and ethnic cleansing against the Bosniaks, the Muslim population in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Pushing people off of their land in order to resettle people of your own ethnicity there is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing is actually part of the definition of genocide, according to the UN Convention after World War II. The UN Convention discusses anything that would affect nations, national groupings like this. And in the second part, the second of like 5 possible things, because it's like any or all of these things, could be committing bodily harm and or mental harm suffering against, and whole or part on the people there intended to harm that nation. That's literally what's happening here. You're driving people off of their land. You're traumatizing them. We already have at least 200,000 displaced people, right? Refugees being pushed away from Syrian Kurdistan, and several thousand of them actually fled across the border into Iraqi Kurdistan.
Well, looking at this, is Donald Trump handling the situation well?
Well, no, since he kind of created the situation. There wouldn't have been a situation, and there didn't need to be American troops there at all for us to just have said no. According to our reports from the White House, since everything leaks out of this White House, when Erdogan asked to send in troops to do this, Trump was supposed to say no. Instead, he said yes. And since then, he hit a firestorm of criticism from his own party, which means he's waffled a little bit and talked about sanctions and whatnot here, but he consistently defends his decision, and defends it in fairly irrational ways. He wants to stop America's endless wars and get the troops out of there, which isn't really what he's doing, given that he's actually increased the number of troops in the Middle East. Right? Even if every American soldier came out of Syria, and that's not happening yet, he has sent more troops to the Middle East. So he's not trying to get us out of war. Certainly not if he's rattling the saber with Iran. And he's constantly acceded to Turkish nationalist rhetoric on this. He's conflated Syrian Kurds with Turkish Kurds as if they're the same people, basically connecting the YPG militias with the PKK, which they're not a part of and never have been. He's used terms like clear them out, which is ethnic cleansing. Right? I mean, he actually said at one point that the PKK are worse than ISIS/Daesh, the terrorist organization we were fighting in Iraq and Syria, which makes no sense at all, since PKK was a nationalist movement fighting against Turkey that isn't even doing that anymore. And somehow that makes them worse than an international jihadist movement? I don't get this thinking at all.
But didn't he negotiate a ceasefire? Isn't that a good thing?
Ceasefire. Okay, so is the ceasefire a good thing? Well, if you think of it as a ceasefire, no, still no. I don't see any reason to think this is a good thing at all. What it basically does is it gives Kurds an opportunity to pack up some crap in a couple of days and get the hell out of their territory. Basically, it's a surrender. It says, here, you can have our land, we're leaving. So, yeah, I mean, it basically gives them an opportunity to run without being immediately shot in the back or having to fight and die right then. So it doesn't get to the massive amount of killing that would have happened, but it still is a surrender of that territory. And not to mention the fact that this whole thing continues to fall directly into the Turks' hands, because it gets them out of the economic sanctions aspect, but it still gives them the land that they asked for. In fact, a larger chunk of land than they were originally trying to get. And Russian troops have moved further into the area. Syrian regime troops have moved further into the area here. Everyone benefits from this except for us, including the Islamic State people, the Daesh, ISIS, whatever you want to call them. That flag has been put up already in a few places. Right? They're able to make a comeback, and hundreds of prisoners have escaped in the confusion of this initial assault. So they're going to be able to make a comeback here. Trump has basically given us back ISIS.
Okay.
Anyway. So, anything else?
Well, is there anything we can do about this in order to improve the situation?
That's a tough one at this point. Really, we shouldn't have gotten into the situation. I mean, we should have just said, no, you cannot invade this country and seize this land. But we did. We allowed it to happen. So, no, not really. I don't know a good way around this, but given the potential for getting much, much worse, for feeding into the terror movements here in the area, and the potential for wider conflict, especially as Syrian regime forces move up into the border areas. If the Turks keep fighting there, it could turn into a shooting war between them. Neither of those countries want it, but it's possible. And it certainly feeds into the sense of grievance that the Kurdish people have, which is going to increase cooperation between the different groups in the different parts of Kurdistan, which means Turkey is basically shooting itself in the foot here by feeding into a broader Kurdish that also is going to be a destabilizing force in the region.
All right, that sums up all of my questions.
Alrighty, well, okay. Well, this is Liam O'Mara and Bridget McConaughey. Have a good day.